Good afternoon. I'm going to be doing the first video exam for Philosophy 305. To begin, I chose prompt 1, which asks, explain and analyze Kant's theory of ethics. Please include discussion of main points and supporting details, how to determine what actions are right, and explain at least 2 obligations of Kant's theory. Kant's theory of ethics attempts to ground morality in logic, by stating that morality is necessary and exceptionless for all rational beings. Kant said that all people are rational self-legislators, so essentially he created his theories to include all of the human race. Kant also stated that immoral actions were irrational, which elaborates on the fact that irrational behavior is caused by following an inconsistent line of reasoning. This inconsistency relies on mistaken assumptions such as beliefs that we are better than other people or that we are exempt from rules that might apply to others. For example, many cases of serious crime such as theft are explained through this inconsistency. People who steal from others typically imagine themselves from being exempt from the rules, clearly showing that stealing is not considered moral behavior. Moving on to the formulations of the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is defined as the one rule from which all moral rules can be derived. In layman's terms, it means what you ought to do, or as described as the thing you have to do all the time. The categorical imperative can be split into 2 formulations. The first formulation the first part of the formulation, also known as the universalizability principle, states that act only in accordance with any maxim that you can will without contradiction, to become a universal law of nature. That was a mouthful. The second formulation, also known as the humanity principle, states act in such a way as to treat people, including oneself and others, as an end in themselves and never as a near means. Part of Kant's theory of ethics is maxims, which are described as principles that are established prior to an action. Maxims are executed by taking form of, when I am in circumstances C, I am to do X. Another part of Kant's theory of ethics is called the hypothetical imperative, defined as what you ought to do if you want something. This imperative ensures the drive for achievement of goals and inclinations. Although Kant's theory of ethics seems legitimate in moral behavior, there are several contradictions associated with his formulations. A common example is the murderer at the door. If a murderer shows up to your door and asks where your best friend is, a natural response would be to act as if you don't know where your friend is and that he or she is not there. According to Kant's theory, this is not moral behavior and violates the second formulation. By lying to the murderer, you are not allowing the murderer to exercise his or her rational moral behavior. Basically, Kant says, in order to determine what actions are right or wrong, you must act with ifs and only with oughts. The rational thought process should be a theoretical assembly line, where maxims are raw materials, formulations are checkpoints, and moral obligations are the finished product. Lastly, the only obligations of Kant's theory of ethics are the problem of counterintuitive results and the problem of specification. For example, it is never okay to kill one in order to save millions of people, just like saying lying is always wrong in every situation. Now that I've concluded the first prompt, I will move on to the second prompt, which asks to explain and analyze the theory of utilitarianism. Please include discussion of main points, how to determine what is good and what action is right, and also explain at least 2 objections with 2 possible reasons for both objections. Utilitarianism is a consequentialistic theory that one should do whatever brings about the greatest possible balance of happiness over unhappiness, where everyone's happiness is counted equally. Before considering the contradicting objections, this theory seems to be the most legitimate in determining morality. The use of the hedonic calculator determines what actions are right and what is good or bad. For example, if you separated the pros and cons of going to school versus skipping school, the hedonic calculator would determine that going to school is indefinitely the moral thing to do. But just like every theory of ethics, there are always objections that complicate the guidelines of determining what is right and wrong. The first objection I will discuss is the problem of the utility monster. The utility monster is someone who gets a lot of pleasure from causing others to suffer or be upset. According to the hedonic calculator, the actions from the utility monster cause him more happiness than the people who suffer from his actions. Of course, we understand this is a problem, and the utility monster must not exist any longer. Two reasons to explain this objection is that utilitarianism does not account for rights or justice, and the hedonic calculator is the hedonic calculator is arbitrary, meaning that a numerical value can never be placed on happiness. The second objection is the fact that personal relationships are never taken into account. For example, if 5 strangers are tied to one train track, and your mother is tied to the other train track, which track do you choose? Most individuals would say to save their mother and kill the 5 strangers. Naturally, we would want to keep our mother around versus 5 strangers we've never met before. However, utilitarianism says that you should save the 5 strangers because conserving 5 lives is more legitimate than taking one. Clearly, this reasoning is a huge issue in many different decision-making processes. Two reasons to explain this objection is that utilitarianism does not account for obligations such as keeping promises, and that human beings have emotional ties to others. Thank you.